The name Angevin Empire is a neologism, which is to say people didn't call it that back then. In reality it was just known as the Kingdom of England, although in practical terms the Angevin Empire was about as powerful as, or more than the Holy Roman Empire. Henry II, Duke of Normandy, had just won the succession war against his uncle, King Stephen. The Duchy of Normandy had been part of the English realm since the Norman conquest of England in 1066. Henry was also married to Eleanor of Aquitaine, inheriting the Duchy of Aquitaine from her father William X. At this point Henry controlled the majority of French lands, as well as the Kingdom of England, beginning what historians know as the Angevin Empire. Henry was one of many English kings of this period to rarely visit England, spending 6.5 of his first 8 years of reign in France. King Louis VII of France didn't really get on with Henry very well. To put into perspective, Henry had inherited Normandy, a historic region of France, married his ex-wife, and inherited Aquitaine from her, meaning Henry now owned more of France than the King of France himself. Both Henry and Louis would amass several alliances, creating a Cold War scenario where neither side wanted an all-out conflict with the other. Eventually the two signed a treaty and even arranged a marriage between both their eldest children, Henry and Margaret. Henry turned his attention to Brittany, exerting influence in their civil war, hoping to rule indirectly and set up inheritance for one of his sons. Having similar ambitions on Toulouse, ruled by Count Raymond V, Henry convened with his ally, Louis VII, hoping to gain his military support. Henry left the meeting believing he had the backing of Louis, although Louis had already married off his sister to the Count of Toulouse, ensuring peace between the two. When Henry launched his invasion, he was surprised to find Louis meeting with Count Raymond. Not wanting to start an all-out war with France, Henry decided to redirect his assault to the surrounding counties. After the Toulouse fiasco, Louis began trying to repair relations in 1160, ensuring their alliance was secured. On the inside, however, Louis was operating on an aggressive stance towards Henry, building alliances intent on containing English expansion. Their relations steadily deteriorated for the next few years until war broke out over Crusader funds in 1167. Louis allied himself with the Welsh, Scots and Bretons and invaded Normandy. Henry launched an attack on a major French military base, burning it to the ground and forcing a truce. Henry used this truce to crush the rebels in Brittany and restore control over the region. As time went on, Henry was forced to think about the inevitability of death, choosing to divide his empire between his three heirs, Henry, Richard and Geoffrey. During this period, Henry turned his eyes toward the British Isles, specifically Ireland. Ireland at this time was ruled by a single king, anglicised as Rory O'Connor. As the High King of Ireland, Rory technically ruled over the entirety of Ireland, however he had limited authority, with local kings having total autonomy. Henry's invasion was greatly encouraged by the Pope, Alexander III, who saw this as an opportunity to establish his authority over the Irish Church. Many historians refer to Irish Christianity during this period as insular Christianity, which blended Irish traditions with Roman Catholicism. The papacy had long considered them astray, with Pope Adrian IV giving Henry a claim to Ireland to forcibly convert the masses. Henry's invasion was short and decisive, marching an army into Wales to crush a rebellion before sailing to Ireland. Norman military technology was superior to Irish technology at this point, leading to a quick surrender from Rory and subduing the local kings. The two kings reached an agreement that Rory would pay homage to Henry while remaining as the High King of Ireland. This meant that the Low Kings of Ireland ruled independently and paid homage to the High King, who himself paid homage to the English king. The English throne didn't have much control over Ireland, instead just keeping them English aligned and sending money to Angers. If you remember from earlier, Henry II's eldest son, Henry, known as the Young King, was married off to Louis's daughter, Margaret, creating an alliance between the two powerful kings. While the Anglo-French alliance fell through, the young Henry was still married to Margaret, maintaining relations. The young Henry began to clash with his father over him ruling over no land, as well as Henry II's decision to reduce his eldest son's inheritance, transferring 3 castles over to his youngest son, John. Henry II had alienated himself diplomatically, leading to the formation of a coalition consisting of his son, Henry, King Louis of France, King William of Scotland, and many local barons and counts in Brittany and Flanders. His sons Richard and Geoffrey followed their older brother in the revolt, with John staying put, probably because he was 7 years old. This rebellion, known as the Revolt of 1173, lasts until 1174, where, although a close call, King Henry prevailed against the revolt, with his sons returning to his service. King Henry and young Henry came to an agreement where the disputed castles remained John's in exchange for 2 castles in Normandy and monetary compensation. Henry wasn't so generous to the King of Scotland, keeping him under house arrest until he agreed to cede 5 castles to Henry and publicly pay homage to him. Over the next decade, Henry looked inwards, stabilising his empire and exerting his authority. Henry's second son Richard was recognised as the Duke of Aquitaine by his father in 1179. In 1181, Henry's third son, Geoffrey, inherited the title of Duke of Brittany. On top of this, Henry had made it clear that John, the youngest son, was his favourite child, granting him many titles, including Lordship of Ireland. As for his eldest son, Henry, he got nothing. Young Henry had grown tired of this by 1182, pressing his previous demands, including the Duchy of Normandy. King Henry refused, instead giving him more pocket money. Obviously this wasn't enough, so King Henry told Richard and Geoffrey to pay homage to young Henry. Henry had no claim over Aquitaine, so Richard refused, and Henry didn't care about Aquitaine, so he wasn't happy either. Geoffrey sided with his brothers, leading to war breaking out in 1183. Henry and Richard led a campaign together, however, Henry caught a fever and died before the war could conclude. With the primary beneficiary dead, the war ended as suddenly as it began. With the eldest son dead, talking about Henry's will get way less confusing, and also Richard would now be the primary heir of England. Henry intended to strip Richard and Geoffrey of their lands for their rebellion. Geoffrey's rule over Brittany couldn't be taken since it was held by marriage, so Richard was instructed to give up Aquitaine to John, Henry's golden child. Richard obviously said no before being told he won't inherit anything if he refuses, so then he agreed. In 1186, Geoffrey died in a tournament in Paris, leaving Henry with only 2 heirs. It was no secret that Henry loved his youngest son John and held a grudge against his eldest Richard. During this rocky period, Louis of France had abdicated after suffering a stroke that left him paralysed before passing away shortly after. The new king, Philippe II, was a schemer, crafting a cordial relationship with Henry while influencing Richard and Geoffrey. After the death of Geoffrey, Philippe demanded the Duchy of Brittany and custody of his children due to his close friendship with the late Geoffrey. Henry obviously said no, so Philippe raised his armies for invasion, with Henry doing the same, leading to a tense standoff at Châteauroux before a truce was put forward by the Pope. Philippe used this opportunity to grow closer to Richard, attempting to pit him against his father. At the same time with this, Jerusalem had fallen to the Muslim Sultanate of Egypt, prompting talks of a crusade to return it to Christian rule. Richard was big on crusading, as we'll find out later, and was eager to join. Henry and Philippe also intended to join the crusade, although Richard spent this intermittent time campaigning in Aquitaine. This act undermined the armistice between Henry and Philippe, leading to war breaking out once again. Henry and Philippe couldn't agree on a peace deal, with Henry proposing a long-term peace plan. Richard believed Henry was stalling for time, infuriating him. During peace talks, Philippe offered several concessions in exchange for Richard to marry Alice, Philippe's sister, and for Richard to be Henry's recognised heir. Henry refused this, leading to Richard also demanding Henry's agreement before paying homage to Philippe in front of Henry and several nobles. Henry may have been outraged by this, but he was a bit busy dying from a bleeding ulcer. As a consequence of this, Henry wasn't really in a position to be negotiating, so when their armies came to head, Henry agreed to a complete surrender, agreeing to all terms put forward by Philippe and Richard. When Henry, now on the cusp of death, arrived home, he reportedly was informed that his youngest son John had publicly sided with Richard, causing him to keel over and die, proving to be the final shock to end his life. Richard inherited his father's lands, which had been agreed upon, although he never truly married Alice. Henry was the first and by far the longest reigning king of Angevin, with the empire only surviving 25 more years, less than Henry's 35-year reign. Henry's reign had enormous consequences on English, British, Irish and global history, building England up to the powerhouse it would become, paving the way for a unified Britain, and perhaps ensuring its future as the largest empire in human history.